The views and opinions expressed on this platform are of me, myself, and I, not any agency I'm affiliated with. So please do not take what I say personally. Before we dive in, I'm going to give a shout out to my husband who picked that intro music. Not only does it sound super cool and groovy, but he said it kind of sounds like ambulance sirens, and I don't disagree. So, also, if you like the cover photo or the logo image, whatever it's technically called, this is not my forte, but the overall image of what you see for the podcast, that cover art, that is thanks to one of my good friends, one of my favorite people. His name is Riley James. He has his own podcast called If Anyone Cares. Really cool setup. I sent him like 6 photos and general ideas, and I was like, this is what I think. And then he sent me a couple back, and the final product, it's sick, it's cool. I never could have pictured that myself. So thank you, Riley. It means the world. Thanks for tuning into 22 of the Lips. And because this is the first episode, my mom taught me not to talk to strangers, which goes against everything of this job. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Alexis Hardwick. I'm currently 27 years old. I grew up in the dirty south of Louisiana, and as of this current episode, I live in the gorgeous state of Utah where I work as a paramedic. So, however it is you heard about the podcast, whether you're a friend or whether you just so happen to stumble over this, I'll give you a little insight into what this is. Basically, 22 of the Lips is a podcast of EMS material and content of the general healthcare system, but especially when it comes to emergency care medicine and techniques, all from the perspective of actual in-the-field workers and staff. In this podcast, we'll talk about what makes us great, our weaknesses, and just dive into what makes us who we are, and probably a bunch of rants and sessions of venting. It's topics that listeners request, the opinions I have that nobody's asked for, and conversations with the people in my life or I've just encountered in this field that have impacted me. Quite literally, the title came from my partner at the time when I was thinking of forming this podcast. Shout out to Logan. The dude is the real MVP. But he gave me the idea, and it's so perfect because, quote, 22 at the lips is the marker of 22 centimeters of an endotracheal tube for when we intubate somebody in the field. And it's one of the many indications of what gives us like a confirmation of where the ET tube is. It's also quite literally the year 2022, and it's from my own lips and eventually the people that I'll have on the show. So, like, for a breakdown, when it comes to the premise of this podcast, everybody's got opinions and ideas, and here are mine and the people I'll have on the show. I haven't been in EMS for very long, but I've worked enough overtime and asked enough questions and listened to enough podcasts to feel like I have some form of input. So my credentials include that I got my EMT basic certification in August of 2020, and in this past January of 2022, I acquired my paramedic patch. Shout out to me. Um, but before EMS, I had a short career of teaching English to high school students and an even shorter stint of trying to work a 9-to-5 office job in a law firm. Yes, these were huge jumps to take and go into the healthcare field, and no, I was not ready. So right now you may be asking yourself, Alexis, how does this even happen? And I'm glad you asked. Very long story short that nobody wants. Eventually got my degree in English in college. I changed my major like 7 or 8 times. And I was like kind of at this end of the road idea where I was like, I don't know what to do with my life. I guess being a teacher is it because I want to change lives. I want to impact students. And it was nice and it was great. But my first year of teaching, I got to the end of it, and basically, like, even though I had awesome co-teachers, I had a great school that I was at, my students were pretty fantastic. I just realized that, like, I hated it. But I was like, I'm just going to get past this first year. I landed my dream subject and grade to teach, which was early American literature with 11th graders. And it was awesome, gave me tons of joy. And then I started to hate it again. And like, it wasn't even my kids. And again, teaching faculty was awesome, but it just didn't feel right. So after that, I set off and started a job at a law firm, and my end goal was to become a lawyer, but I got so tired of being stuck in a cubicle all day long and feeling like I was giving all my time and energy into a job that, like, at the end of the day, it just felt like it didn't even matter. So at this point, I'd narrowed down that I wanted a job where I could leave work and just go home, but not work somewhere where I was stuck inside all day, and all the while feel like I'm making an impact in people's lives. But like I felt like that type of job just didn't exist. So I tried to go back into teaching for 3 months, convincing myself that I could do better and accept the cons of the job as just the notion of like, oh well, this is just part of it. And no, I wound up in the same exact boat. But this time I just walked out. Uh, I made terrible decisions. Um, but from there, it was just a matter of like soul searching, trying to even start a career as an editor and consider getting my master's degree. And then COVID hit, which, for whatever reason, it unearthed this need to help people and literally get my hands dirty and be involved in the healthcare industry. And to this day, I still don't know when the seed was planted, but at some point, it kind of like blossomed overnight into a garden that like I couldn't even tame and absolutely consumed me. So I started work as a caregiver with these sweet elderly people, and this is where, if you've been like hanging on, trying to figure out where we're going, this is where like the start of EMS came from. I had one client in particular that I would go to her house, help her around, clean up her house, whatever, and bring her to the store. We'd buy plants to put around in her garden, even though her family kept telling me, like, stop letting her buy plants. Um, I was bad. So it was a sweet gig until like one day I got to her house and I was like, "Good morning, Miss So and So. How are you doing today?" And she's still in the bed. I'm like, something's not right. And I'm looking at her and she's trying to talk to me, but like there's one side of her face that's drooping. She can't raise one arm on that same side and just she just doesn't look right. So I big stupid me. I called the agency that I was working for and I'm like, "Hey guys, something's wrong with Miss So and so." And I explained to them what was going on and they're like, "Oh my god, she might be having a stroke. Please call 911 right now." And I was like, what, how do you know that?" So I called 911 and the EMT and paramedic got there and they kind of went through their thing. They started doing stuff and like it just looked so cool. Um, So I was basically just asking, like, "Hey, do you guys like your job?" And obviously, they're trying to do 50 different things and load up and go. But the EMT stopped and she was like, "Man, I couldn't imagine doing anything else." So for whatever reason, I decided, I was like, "Man, I want to be a nurse." So I enrolled in EMT school with the idea of being like an ER tech and then eventually, going on and like doing nursing school along the way and all this stuff. But during EMT school, I did my first ride time, like on the ambulance, and I don't know what it was. Maybe the dynamic of the unknown, which thrilled and terrified me all at the same time, or just like it just felt so. It's so cheesy. It felt so cool, and so I was like, man, I now I'm rethinking everything. I um I also started thinking about one of the guys that I grew up with. His name was Josh Wheeler, who he became an EMT and he always talked about how much he loved his job. And it was so just amazing listening to his stories and the way like he would be so tired when we all got together at church or whatever, but like he would still sit back and say like, "Man, I can't believe I get paid to do this job." And later on, Josh was actually kind of the motivating factor of when I decided to become a paramedic. He passed away in the process of trying to help somebody after he was involved in a nasty wreck when he was on his way home from a shift. So, like, if nothing else, I just wanted to continue his legacy and like keep his memory alive and honor him. Anyways, So I started working as an EMT with big eyes, no need for sleep, and an annoying, bubbly personality that still it's pretty present at times. And within 3 months into being a basic, decided that I want to start calling the shots and make decisions. And I have a story about the exact moment when I knew, but we're gonna save that for later. Basically, I went the zero to hero route, as some people say. Enrolled in paramedic school around 5 months after getting my basic, and therefore I now have my paramedic certification as of January of 2022. Um, yes, I started in Louisiana, but it was probably halfway through paramedic school. I had a ER clinical at a hospital, and my husband, Trevor, he was like, hey, let's eat pizza tonight. And I'm like, absolutely. So I met up with him, and we had been talking about moving and whatnot. And he, we started kind of getting on that idea. And he was like, what if we moved out of state? And I was like, absolutely. And I'm thinking like Colorado or Tennessee. And he was like, what about Utah? And I was like, oh, this was not in my forefront at all. So he started talking about how very long story short, he wanted to be a helicopter EMS pilot. And it was super cool. And the program he was talking about was awesome. So we kind of made a decision before we ever visited Utah that we would move to Utah. And bless his heart, he tried this whole thing of like, what if you became a flight medic and we could work together and we could see each other every day? And granted, I 100% respect, admire all the flight medics out there. It's not, who the education for it, the certification process, all that. It's not easy, and I don't think I could ever do it. But at the core of it, my thing is always number one. I hate flying. I hate. I guess it's the lack of control, whatever it is. And number two, the size of the ambulance space in the back is small enough. In the helicopter, you literally are working in the space the size of a porta potty, and I cannot trade that. So I'm not becoming a flight medic, but basically, we've traveled this journey, and through through moving from Louisiana to Utah and starting at this new company and all of that stuff, I've gained a vast amount of experience and knowledge through some great and not so great people I've had the opportunity of working with. Like, the company I say I quote grew up in EMS in Louisiana was all I knew. But I had worked with a fair amount of partners and built a foundation as an EMT basic that I've carried with me as a paramedic due to the sheer quality of some of those medics. And now I'm in Utah and I've started a new company. And I mean, I can say the same thing. It's at the core of this job, having a good partner will make or break your career as far as being able to enjoy it, having calls run smoothly, seeing management, and just overall if you're even able to get through a shift. And I'll attest to this. You can ask some of the best EMTs and medics, and it just when it comes down to it, you are a product of who you surround yourself with. And like some of those same partners that I've enjoyed working with and the ones I haven't, kind of what I've gleaned is that like you learn a lot by working in this field. You learn so much through school. You learn so much through if you continue education and you continue immersing yourself in ways to grow. But like all in all, I've learned that this field is wild. It is unpredictable. It is ever changing with management and data and protocols and medicine and studies. And it's equally frustrating and rewarding and has provided some of the most intense challenges and adrenaline pumping moments I've had the opportunity to experience. So like in this job, I've gained stories and experience calls that like when I think back to them, that's it's there's this part of me that can't believe I was able to even be a part of it. And then if I try to tell some of those stories, HIPAA appropriate stories, it's stuff that like people look at you and they're like, you have to be making this up. Or like, are you serious? Whatever. Like, I love this field, even when I hate it and I just want to go home to a hot meal and my husband. and especially my bed for a decent amount of sleep after after me and my partner would be running hours straight and are ready to eat the leftover crackers left in between the seats of the ambulance, whatever. So, with this podcast, I just want to share my reflections of things that I've dealt with in the pre-hospital field. Some episodes will low key be pep talks to myself about staying in love with this job. Some, like I mentioned, they're going to be interviews with people that I look up to in EMS or somehow have shaped me into who I am as a healthcare provider. And I don't really know where this podcast is going to go. Like, honestly, it just kind of started out as an idea for a blog, but, even though podcasts are so overdone, I also knew if I stuck with a blog, I never finished editing my own content. So, verbal speech it is. Maybe it's like this leftover teaching motivation. I don't know. There's just a lot of stuff that like I want to get off my chest. And maybe it's from some entitlement that I feel like I'm able to share some insight or mostly the idea that like if this can help somebody else, why not share it? But whatever it is, I just want to help people. And as cheesy as that sounds, and maybe offer something that, someone else can learn from and not make the same mistakes that I have. Through this podcast, don't expect earth shattering revelation. I have my thoughts, and some of the stuff is going to have research with it. So, in that vein, haha, veins, I want feedback. I want questions. I want commentary. I want to be able to create content that other people can give feedback on, whether it's to agree on stuff or call me out and tell me I'm utterly incorrect, or to kind of like spout off some other, pathway of whatever it is. I'll take all of the above. One of the most underutilized tools we have in EMS is one another. And whether it's because pride will stop a provider from reaching out or a fear of being ridiculed, I'm not sure. But nonetheless, I just want to be good at my job. And I know other people do. And it's not for the pat on the back. But at the end of it, it is because our patients deserve people who want to try to do good. So, with all of that, here we are. Here I am. And it was a lot of rambling, probably, but this is what the podcast is. So, guys, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, future topic ideas, please email me at 22 at the lips podcast at gmail.com. Again, that's 22 at the lips podcast at gmail.com. Thanks. Never stop learning and be safe out there, friends.